Okay. Well, let's get clear on the next topic.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about what happened with Starbucks
in
Philadelphia. And this is your neck of the woods. So in a moment we can talk about what that area may look like in terms of culture and diversity. And
so
why
you're
this
saying
may have
they
happened.
have Starbucks all the way in Philadelphia?
All the way in Philly.
Oh
we have them on every corner too, guys.
Oh
and I like that other joke. Starbucks is planning to open up a Starbucks in the bathroom of a current Starbucks. That's how many there are. That's from The Onion.
It's serious.
The Onion.
Anywho.
I love The Onion.
I love quoting jokes. It makes me seem funny even though I didn't write this stuff.
Yeah, just own it yourself.
It's delivery and confidence, Rob.
Delivery and confidence, correct.
Okay,
Okay, so what had happened in Philadelphia, correct, at the Starbucks, two men, it sounds like the setup of a joke, and it's not a joke, so here's what happened. Two men walk into Starbucks in Philadelphia, two black men. They are waiting for their third person. They're going to have a meeting inside of a Starbucks. This third person is a white man, but they're waiting on him. So these two gentlemen are sitting down, waiting. They didn't order anything, but they're waiting in the lobby because this is where they're going to have their meeting. They end up getting arrested for loitering because they did not order anything. So I'm trying to understand what the heck happened here. So this other gentleman walks in to meet them for the meeting while the two friends are being escorted out in handcuffs. So the big controversy this morning is, why were these men handcuffed? Why were they arrested? They weren't doing anything, and they happened to be two men of color. So of course the CEO of Starbucks is speaking out this morning on Starbucks, regrets everything that has happened, says we're so sorry, trying to get down to the bottom of it. That Starbucks employee has since, they don't know if he or she has been fired. That person he is not at that store anymore. He or she is not at that store anymore, but they don't know if he's still within the company.
Right.
So we want to know from you, how you feel about this story. And I know, again, going back to the Philadelphia Roots thing, can you talk to us about that area in which this happened?
Sure, but I just want to clarify one thing, and it was that when the police officers came in, they asked there were a lot of questions of, did anyone from Starbucks ask the two gentlemen, the black gentlemen that were waiting for their friend, if they were to leave? Did they ask, will you guys please leave? A number of witnesses in the store are on record saying that nobody asked the gentleman to leave. The police just showed up. And when they showed up, that's almost the exact same time that the white friend showed up. And the police officers, because they had to, asked them to leave, and they said no. So that, a lot of people are misreporting, so I wanted that to get out, that the gentleman said no to the cops, and the police commissioner of Philadelphia, a black man, spoke up and said the cops didn't want to make that arrest in the first place. It's something that they didn't want to do. They got there, the gentleman said no, I imagine because they didn't do anything wrong, so they're saying, why are you arresting me? But those men didn't resist arrest when the police officers came forward to them. So they're taking them out. They get all the way to the station. They take their photographs. They fingerprint these men. And then Starbucks calls up and says, we're not going to press charges. So you release them. So then it's the question of who finally flagged down someone at Starbucks and said, guys, something really wrong happened here. And if you book these men fully, you're going to be in more hot water than you already are now.
You're going to regret it.
There was somebody that finally had the smarts to say, oh, we need to pull the plug on this one.
Okay, can we just point out, why are the police getting involved with this?
They said that this happens all the time. I listened to an interview with the police commissioner, and he said in Philadelphia, they get a lot of calls from businesses that want police to show up just to monitor a situation.
Right.
I get it. It's a big city. We have a good amount of crime in our city, but these guys weren't doing anything.
Right. I mean, first of all, if people are hanging out for way too long in the view of that employee of Starbucks and not ordering anything, did they approach them and say, hey, are you guys going to order anything? We sort of have a rule here, like you can't just hang out here all day unless you're going to order something. These are not my rules. These are the rules of the Starbucks. Was that conversation ever had? Like, how did this go from sitting there to getting handcuffed in public, which is a very humiliating thing, by the way, even if you're innocent. So I just don't understand. I mean, people need to understand de-escalation of all these situations should always be the first choice.
Right.
Did they approach him? Step number 2, the cops show up. They say, hey, here's the deal. Hey, can we talk to you guys outside? Here's the deal. They're saying this, whatever. So are you guys ordering, or what's the deal? Instead of going all the way to handcuffing, then getting dragged down to the station. I mean, it just seems like so many choices were made to escalate the situation versus de-escalate, because I'm telling you right now, I'd rather have those police officers on the street worrying about other things than dealing with people in Starbucks.
So it says they're arrested for trespassing. For trespassing. So, I mean, when I think of that, right, doesn't that mean you're somewhere where you shouldn't be? And maybe the rule there is that you need to order before, just like you can't use the restroom at places if you don't
That's
order.
what they're saying happened.
Okay.
That the gentleman asked to use or he was going to use the restroom.
I see it happening all the time.
And somebody called him out for not having purchased anything. But past that, nothing was
Like,
said
why were the
on
cops
the record.
called? I mean, I see it. I was just at Starbucks the other day, and a gentleman comes in and asks for a cup of water for who knows what. It could be an emergency or maybe not. Asked for a cup of water, and I said, sorry, unless you buy something, we cannot provide you with a free cup of water. He said, okay, and walked away. So do we know if they went to the restroom? They actually, if they used the restroom after they were told no, then it's sort of like, I'm not saying cops needed to be called, but rules are the rules when it comes to even small rules like that. Again, don't think the cops need to be called, but instead of handling that on their own, like, please don't use the restroom. Okay, keep using the restroom. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, just trying to get more of the details of the story because we're all hearing something a little different.
So I want to read a quote from our Mayor Kenney, Jim Kenney. He says, I am heartbroken to see Philadelphia in the headlines for an incident that, at least based on what we know at this point, appears to exemplify what racial discrimination looks like in 2018.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the mayor standing up and calling everyone involved out on what happens. That's what I like about Philadelphia. That's what I like about a lot of the incidents right now. We're having our political figures stand up and say, you know what? We might not have all the facts, but I'm going to tell you as a citizen in the same community how I feel about that. And I think that's a stark contrast to how things were handled even just a decade ago, where your politicians would mum's the word until we have all of our ducks in a row. Now people understand that we want to see emotion from our politicians and we want to know that you really represent the community. So I applaud him for doing that.
Yeah, you know, because politicians, it's always in their best interest to say a lot without saying too much. Because then
Just
they
attract
pin you
whatever they're
down
gonna-
on certain
for their
issues.
base.
Yeah,
like, they want to get
exactly.
reelected, so they don't want to ruffle anyone's feathers. But in this case, more of these stories, it's becoming more of like, that's just what's right and what's wrong. Like whether it's the law or not, it's why were these men arrested if they didn't do anything bad? Don't you have other things that you need to be doing? But then they're on the side of police officers everywhere. I'm sure it's like, we're just doing our job. Like you said, they're not trying. So it's how do you make the change? I mean, go back to what's happened with Stephon Clark, a very different situation, but this was an unarmed black man here in Northern California. But what's interesting about both of those stories is that there are, you mentioned that the police chief was black in Philadelphia. So both here, we have Daniel Hahn, police chief black. Over there, police chief black. Does that make a difference in telling these stories? Because how about if they were white or a person not of color? Because then you would go, okay, the problem starts there at the top. Maybe they're biased or unbiased, or they're biased and they need to be more unbiased. But when you have two black men at the helm, why are there still issues then? Not to say that they are in the minds of every person who's in the police force, but at least we're there. At least we're there. So what's the outcome of this story? These men have been released?
They have been released, but I think they're still investigating the
Why
situation.
did this happen? Yeah, like you said, humiliation.
But what's new today is that the CEO of Starbucks, Kevin Johnson, flew from Seattle to Philadelphia, and he's making an address today. And so we have a snippet of that address. Well, he made that address. We have a snippet of it.
You have said that you want to have a more of an investigation. So is there anything more that you know this morning about how and why this happened?
Well, good morning, Robin. You know, first of all, I'll say the circumstances surrounding the incident and the outcome in our store on Thursday were reprehensible. They were wrong. And for that, I personally apologize to the two gentlemen that visited our store. Now, certainly, you know, it's my responsibility to understand what happened and what led to that and ensure that we fix it.
Has anybody asked the store manager, why did they do this? I mean, we were talking amongst ourselves. People, you see them in Starbucks all the time conducting business meetings. They're not buying any products. And even when we saw in the piece when the woman said that she had been there too, has anybody asked her why these particular men did she feel compelled to call the police?
Well, Robin, certainly with 28,000 stores around the world, different regions put in some slightly different guidelines in how they handle certain situations. In sort of reviewing this case, the guidelines that they had in place indicated a certain set of scenarios in which the police were to be called. Now, there are some scenarios where the police should be called. If there's threats or disturbance, those may be appropriate times. In this case, none of that occurred. It was completely inappropriate to engage the police. And so clearly there's an opportunity for us to provide clarity. And in addition to that, I'd say there's training, more training that we're going to do with our store managers, not only around the guidelines, but training around unconscious bias. What happened to those two gentlemen was wrong.
Because you said in your statement, and I quote here, that Starbucks stands firmly against racial profiling. So you believe that was the case here?
Well, Robin, Starbucks was built as a company that creates a warm, welcoming environment for all customers. That didn't happen in this case. That I know. And so it's my responsibility to ensure that we review everything.
So it was this apology right here that one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter in Philadelphia, Asa Khalif, came out and said, I just don't believe it. It's lip service at this point. It's too little. It's too late. And everyone is wondering, when are we going to hear from the two men that are arrested? What is their vantage point? How did it all go down from their point of view?
But
So
that
that's
store
what people in
employee,
Philadelphia
that's
are
what I
waiting
want to hear
for.
from what, because seeing this video, it's infuriating.
Right.
You know, whether a person was shot and killed or someone is handcuffed and walked out, it's a power trip. Someone here had a power trip and said, okay, I don't like the way in which someone is not listening to me. And this is me, again, just watching this video from one vantage point, but okay, let me call the police because that's the fix. But what happens is they're training on the employee level to go, when you call the police, is it up to the police to say whether or not they are or are not going to arrest, or is it up to the employee to make that decision? Isn't that the police? So when they say they didn't want to arrest, why did they arrest then?
I think you have to follow the code. That's what the police
What
commissioner
code?
said.
You
He
show
said,
up to monitor the situation, right?
I
And if
think
nothing
if
bad's
an
happening,
employee calls, and I can't
For
speak from a
trespassing,
place
for
of
trespassing,
knowledge, but
okay.
from what I've heard people saying, if the employee makes a call to the police saying, I feel like I'm in either a threatening situation or there are people here that shouldn't be here, I need you to come remove
and they
them.
won't, and they won't leave, and we
and
ask
they
you to
won't,
leave. Right.
then the police have to come down and they have to do something about it.
Right.
They can't just ignore that phone call because
Right.
what if something were actually
If
happening?
they were asked to leave and they stay, then it's trespassing.
then it's
Right.
trespassing, which is what
Exactly.
they were arrested for. Okay, so
'Cause it
Patrice
all-
Rowe,
'cause it
Collins.
escalated. That's the whole thing. Why? Where was the conversation? But, I mean, and
Right.
we don't know.
Communication, like human
Yeah,
communication.
exactly. Like just.
Yep.
And by the way, that Starbucks did not look crowded to me. Maybe everyone left once the police showed up. They're like,
Yeah.
"This is ridiculous. We're out of here."
Right.
Or maybe it just wasn't crowded in the first place.
I
I
can't
don't
tell you
know.
how many times I've gone to a Starbucks and did my college homework.
Yeah.
And didn't buy
Oh, how many
Right,
did they never
exactly.
buy
I was going to
anything?
say the exact same thing. I've been to that exact Starbucks so many times I can't count. It's usually packed.
Okay, gotcha.
There's a lot going on that street. It's one of the biggest shopping areas in that street. It's usually packed. But there are also tons of college students, just like Mason was saying, that are there every day.
Oh yeah.
If those two men, this is a question from Les Rodwell, if those two men had bought something, would we be having this conversation?
I don't think so.
No, because then they're not trespassing.
Right, but then
Trespassing.
how many people? Because I'm wondering if he is just playing devil's advocate and saying,
Right.
why are we talking about this? At the end of the day, people can just sit in Starbucks.
Right.
They do it every day.
But wait,
They just can't do
I
it
guess
while
that's my
being
question.
black.
Can we? I didn't
do.
know we
I'm-
couldn't.
You.
I didn't
see
know
what-
we.
I
There
know
is
what
a
you're
loitering
saying.
issue.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But let's just say, okay, let's just say it's crowded, and they're taking up a table and they're not buying anything. From a manager's point of view,
Right.
And let's just say they're like, hey, we want to sit down. We've got all our stuff, and they're looking for a seat. And then these guys have been there for an hour. They're not ordering anything. From a manager's point of view, they probably feel compelled that they need to do something. They need to move things along. You know, you can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to TGI Fridays and sit there all day without ordering anything. So
Right.
there's still a business. I would just say this: de-escalation is the way forward.
Yep.
And to talk to your point about power tripping, that's a real thing. Let me tell you about my first job. 16 years old, I was a lifeguard at Raging Waters in San
Yes,
Dimas.
Raging Waters.
And I learned something very early on. We said there are two kinds of lifeguards: those that blow the whistle because they can, and those that blow the whistle because they want to. You know, that they
have the
need
power.
to,
It's all
or
about
that
power.
yeah, because they can or because they need to. In other words, this is a dangerous situation. Whistle, you go and do something about
Someone
it.
else deal with it.
Or
I'm
they're
trying to
just
serve coffee.
whistling at kids because they're walking too fast because they're tripping on power. And these are
Right.
16-year-olds, so it does happen. Is my point. Maybe I just want to talk about being a lifeguard.
Bring up Southern
Sitting out in the
California.
sun.
We'll keep following the details
Yeah.
as they come in because, you know, we do want to hear from the two men that were actually arrested and what Jim Kinney has to say to the CEO. I am very interested in that
Yes,
conversation.
and that employee, if we confirmed it's a she, did I hear that from you? well, I don't know why I'm doing this. My IFB has since left the building.
Bye.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Okay, he or she, again, has not, no longer works at that Starbucks. We're just trying to figure out if they still work at another Starbucks. Because in that case, I'd be like, well, then do you really stay true to what you're saying, CEO, if this happened? Like, well, what are the consequences that he or she is facing if he ends up being that they're in the wrong? So let us know. Continue how you feel. Go ahead. You have one more thing to say?
Yes, that big story coming from Janice Armstrong, who's a big name in Philadelphia, a great journalist, wrote an article. Headline says, employee at Starbucks needs to be fired, and it's an interview with the police officers involved. So that's a good one. I'll put it on my Facebook page so you guys can read it.
All right, everyone. Thank you for chiming in today. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more stories just like this one, all you got to do is hit subscribe.